has passed on her apologies. I'm not... Right, thank you, Richard. Councillor Mercer, we're not sure about it. Maybe that he arrives later on in the meeting. Just to begin with, could I ask the members of the panel just to introduce themselves for the people who might be watching this externally?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Councillor Bill Armour, Kirkburton Ward.
Harpreet, Councillor Ashbrow Ward.
Richard Murgatroyd, Councillor Gokha Ward.
Andrew Bird, Co-optee.
Martin Ward from Murfield.
Right, the minutes of the previous meeting, is everybody happy with those as a correct record of the meeting? Okay, thank you. Right, I've got, I think, 3 different things that I want to raise, but has anybody else got any issues that you want to raise related to the minutes and the actions? Okay. If anything else, if you think of anything else while I'm going through things, let me know. Right, the first thing I think is the issue of the town centre. We had a look at the plans that were coming together for Huddersfield and little bit less detail for Dewsbury. We did feel that we wished to come back to have a look at the topic, particularly, I think, to have a look at the different interest groups that have come together and perhaps looking at how we may bring those together. From earlier discussions, I know that, Harpreet, you've got some thoughts on that. Would you like to share those?
The microphone's working this time, which is excellent. No problems today. Thanks, Chair. So we've just been having some discussions about ensuring that we're hearing the voice of businesses or stakeholders in the town centre. And I think we'd be really keen to do some sort of roundtable event with them, just so we're getting understanding from them as well as from the council about some of the stuff that's going on in the town centre, sorry, not city centre, their views, what ideas they may want to contribute, because it's important that we bring all the stakeholders in. I'm sure there's some work already going on that, but it'd be nice as a scrutiny group if we could speak to them directly as well.
Right, thank you. Councillor McBride, would you like to respond to that? So we have had some discussion.
I think that's most welcome, and Alan's just pointed out to me, part of the economic strategy is to encourage greater participation in the process. We do have ongoing relationships with a series of groups, but they tend to be the groups that we have always dealt with. There's a more recent group that made contact with me. Their objective, they say, is to talk up the town. I spent a couple of hours with them last week. I've tried to arrange that they've now become, as it were, an established group in the sense that there'll be a long-term ongoing dialogue with us. But I'm sure there are other groups, and they're not just the businessmen. We've tended to concentrate on the small business on the one hand, meeting with them, and larger business on the other, meeting with them, and so on. But I think there's another group we need to discuss with, and that's the people who live here, who've got a massive vested interest in the town. All the councillors who represent different wards have got a big vested interest in the town. When the master plan is presented, this work that's being undertaken by ACOM, that's going to be rolled out, and we'll be asking as many groups as possible to participate in this process and saying, well, do you think we've got it right? Broadly speaking, is this exactly the right thing to do? We're not fundamentally going to change policy by virtue of that, but how we tweak and how we put and what we place exactly will be influenced significantly by what people say, obviously. That's as much as I can tell you at the moment. Yeah.
Right, thanks very much, Peter. I think with that, what we will need to do is to fix up a meeting with yourself, Peter, with officers and
to arrange
interested people,
really
to look at terms of reference for that and begin to put together a plan about how we can make this happen. I think it does need some careful planning, but I think it is extremely important that we do this. Right. The other 2 issues are to do with the 2 visits. The visit to Barnsley and the visit to Clare House. So Carol's just going to give you an update on the visit.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to confirm the visit on the 30th of January. It's going to Barnsley Market now. We're going to come back a little bit earlier. So we're hoping that it'll be 9 while 1:30 on the 30th of January. I think I've heard from everybody now. So if you can attend, and if you have declined the invitation previously, just let me know in the next couple of days, because we're going to be booking the transport in the next couple of days.
Are we not doing Dewsbury now then?
No, we've shortened it. We had feedback that it was too long a visit, so we'll do Dewsbury on a separate occasion. With regards to Clare House, I've been in touch with officers and we can arrange a visit. So if anybody was interested, please let me know and we can arrange a specific date. So if you just let me know further to the meeting and we'll get that arranged. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Carol. Right. Any other things from the minutes that people have thought of? No? Okay. Item 2, interests. Has anyone on the panel got particular interest?
Sorry, Chair, I haven't got an interest. It was just on the thing that you said before. I'd asked a while ago about Brexit analysis that we'd done at Kirklees level. And I think, Alan, I've got your name right this time, haven't I? Sorry, I got it wrong last time. Alan, I think you said that there had been some analysis done through WICA at a Kirklees level, but you were going to check up on it. So I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the... You might not know right now, so I might need to just follow up with you later.
I'm aware that I've seen some papers around some Brexit analysis. I don't think it's at the Kirklees level. It's WICA analysis about Brexit. That's all I know. I can find those and send them on to you if that would help.
I think WICA's work was on the city regions, the impact on the city region. Clearly, a critical part of that.
Yes, Andrew.
It'll probably come up when we start talking about the economic strategy. Declare I'm an interested member as a director of both the theatre and the media centre.
Thank you. Yes, coming back to the Brexit issue, I wonder, in terms of a brief report, if you're going to have a look for things, would that be worth bringing to the next meeting as just a very brief report on what's happening in terms of Brexit preparations?
Chair, I can say we have convened the internal officer group to look at the implications of Brexit and Kirklees. So that's met once. It's meeting again soon, and we can certainly bring the implications for Kirklees here to a future meeting. That's still being mapped out. As you know, it's still a very confused picture nationally that we are currently contacting all business continuity champions to get an assessment around all the different aspects, which include the economy, medication, etc. So we can certainly bring that here, if that's the same.
Right, thanks very much, David. So we'll perhaps have a chat outside the meeting about when that will be ready, so we can build that into the agenda. Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, admissions of the public. This is obviously a meeting in public. It will be webcast, but we don't have any members of the public at the moment here in the meeting. Right, the first major item that we're looking at today is the update on the refresh of the Kirklees economic strategy and the work that's been undertaken by looking at social value and local wealth building, the work that's been undertaken by CLES. And the way we're going to do this, I think, is have a brief introduction. We've all had some quite detailed papers, and then the aim is to discuss this. Given the fact we've got 3 fairly meaty items on the agenda, I want to sort of keep this to about 35, 40 minutes, something like that, so that we've got time for the other items. So if the 3 people are going to introduce this, if you'd like to introduce yourself as you do your input for the benefit of the people who might be watching externally. So I think to begin with, Councillor McBride, would you like to start off?
Councillor Peter McBride, I'm a Cabinet Member responsible for regeneration planning, strategic transport and related matters. So it's within my portfolio the responsibility for the economic strategy, and indeed also the other paper that's before you, Kirklees' help they've given to us to look at the wider interpretation of what we mean by an economic strategy, to think in terms of things that we might do which you might measure in factors other than money, which traditionally, of course, when we talk about economic strategy, that's what we've been concerned about. But I think there's been a growing awareness of the need to measure our impact and effectiveness in terms of its social impact, its effect on health, effect on housing, and how these various things interlink, and so that we begin to think in a more joined-up way, in a more effective way. So that's one paper, and David is going to speak at much greater length on this. As far as the main strategy is concerned, Alan will speak at length following me. I just recommend one thing to you in terms of the economic strategy. Well, I'm so pleased about this. I've seen so many documents of this nature over the years, whether it's been West Yorkshire or it's been Kirklees, which are wish lists, hopeless visions, which really, to me, are a pain in the neck, and I suspect to anybody in Scrutiny they would feel the same. What I'm pleased about this is it not merely says what we aim to do and states our priorities, it states and how we're going to get there and how we're going to measure whether we got there or not. So, in other words, it's an action programme as well as being a statement of priorities, and it tells you in some detail of what we might do. So enough from me. I'll allow my two colleagues, on the one hand, David to speak on Kirklees and Alan to speak on the main strategy. I'll just add one further point on the strategy. In a sense, the strategy is like four strategies rolled into one. There is a strategy for skills, a strategy for transportation, a strategy for helping business, a strategy for developing town centres and so on, and finally, as Priority 5 says, and how we do that working with the community.
Right, thank you, Peter. And I think it has been useful that we've been looking at all of those strands to the work. It does help to see it in the whole, really. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Alan Seasman. I'm the lead for placing in with investment. In terms of where we've been with the KES since you last saw it, you recall that we came to talk to you in September, and since then there's been quite a bit of further consultation on this. So there has been 5 workshops covering a discussion around the evidence base, a workshop with businesses, one for people and communities, one around physical regeneration and links to health and well-being. It's linked to going to the picture of Kirklees event. There's been a number of one-to-ones, an online consultation exercise, and which is all set out in those sections there. What we've also done is that we have been and briefed SLT and LMT, and it's due to be considered at Cabinet on the 22nd of January. And I think that now that paper's out, we shall circulate a further revised version of the KES that has now been, it's constantly being refined, reiterated. I think the main thing there to concentrate on is following the discussion at LMT. What we've tried to do is to get the length of it down into a punchier document, and the point that Peter was making around the action programme, possibly put that into a section 2. So that we've got an upfront bit which shows you the priorities more clearly and leave the actions for almost like an action plan. Talking about the strategy itself, you'll see that we've got 5 priorities, one around modern innovative business, skilled and ambitious people, advanced connectivity and infrastructure, and revitalising and promoting key centres, and active partnerships. I think the active partnerships thing is important in as much as that's part of the link of some of the recommendations from the Kirklees report that David will talk about, particularly around particular anchor institutions and our relationship with them. But it's also about responding to previous criticism that this was a council-owned document and not a Kirklees document. It's about making that process part of what we do moving forward. Running throughout this is what the KES is trying to do differently than what it did before. And I think if you go back and you remember that when we did the scoping review, the big things that we are trying to address here in all of this is a greater emphasis on inclusive growth and an inclusive economy, and a greater emphasis on tackling issues around productivity. So that's the main themes and the thread of what we're trying to do. This then translates into an action programme around those 5 priorities of modern, innovative business, skilled, ambitious people, connectivity and infrastructure, revitalised centres and active partnerships. And there'll be 12 action programmes that sit underneath that, which result in 5 big wins, we've called them. So this is Peter's point about what we've done in terms of trying to identify the real things that by which we want to achieve and by which our success can be measured. And that's particularly around a new digital innovation zone, work around the integrated care workforce initiative, making the most of the TransPennine upgrade, which I think is a really significant investment in the district, bringing the master planning work for Dewsbury and Huddersfield into this, and then the Kirklees Active Partnerships Network, particularly building on the work that's been done in other places around the work by thinking places. So that's all I'd like to say for now. So over to questions for me. Over to David, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think that's been a really useful summary, and I think it is clear from looking at the documentation, a number of the things that we suggested were necessary, really, when we last met, in terms of working with partnerships, in terms of integrating the 2 aspects of this work. As it happened, there's obviously a lot of work has gone into this over the last few months.
Thank you, Chair. Jacob Bundy, Corporate Policy and Strategy Officer. I think Alan's made a very good point about how the local welfare linkers work is embedded in the overall Kirklees economic strategy. So I think very much these 2 documents should be seen as one offer, really, without doubt. So, and also this should be quite familiar now to this panel. I think you looked at this a couple of times there. We're quite excited by what the analysis shows. That's from Claire's, and last time you heard from Tom and Lloyd Goodwin about the theory and process they went through. You now have in front of you a final report which has got some national press coverage, which is great, certainly with Claire's, and it's really high profile stuff. So as you would have seen, the report itself actually has 4 key themes within it around procurement, employment, land and assets, and democratic ownership. And the 10 recommendations in the report support those key themes. I won't go through all now. Happy to take questions as and when, really, yeah? But I think the progress that we've made since last time we've met is that we have a officer group on social value that is looking at actually progressing these recommendations. Not all have been pinned down in detail yet. Picking up on what Alan said, I think the one priority that we want to make progress on, probably quickest of all, is to create that Kirklees anchor network. That is critical in taking this forward, because we can do a lot of the council alone, but collaboratively with other anchors we can make a lot more progress in terms of maximising our local spend. I think just to illustrate that, you will see that the analysis up front says that we spend locally 44%, or our spend is local, sorry, yeah? And that in a way compares quite well with our authorities. So we start from a higher base rate, if you like. But just to give you an idea, it isn't in the report. If we were to increase that spend locally by 10%, that clears the estimate that would bring another 100 million into the local economy. So if you really multiply that across anchor institutions, I think that tells the story in itself. So our priority is to actually set up that anchor network, and also hopefully to encourage anchors to do a similar spend analysis themselves along those lines. We've also taken it to the Kirklees Inclusive Growth Group and Chair, you were there as part of the workshop around that, and I you remember one of the recommendations was to establish some networks, possibly as part of that group. Yeah, that is yet to be decided, but that's a recommendation moving forward. So I think those are the things. The 10 recommendations are reading the vote, as I said. Yeah, I'm reading it now. We've got a time report. It's out there for the public to see. I think this will help drive the Kirklees economy strategy itself forward and actually stop the wealth extraction that is so damaging to our local economy and maximise that local spend. Just to say, we're also excitingly going to pilot the local wealth building approach in local areas, and we've met with councillors in Ashworth over the other weeks to talk about actually piloting this approach in that area and others, so that will be coming your way very soon as well. Okay. Thank you.
Right, thanks, David, for that summary, and thanks as well for your personal drive and enthusiasm with this, which I think is making a real difference in terms of making it happen. Right, over to the panel now for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a procedural point to start off with, something to note for the future, that the agenda paper that we look at, starting on page 9, details what we as a committee are doing. So on page 11, we have officer recommendations, which say for scrutiny panels to note, but strangely underneath that we have a cabinet recommendation. The recommendation for this committee, if anything, should come from you, Chair, and with respect to our colleagues, what the cabinet members feel we should be doing is largely irrelevant to what we as a scrutiny panel should be doing independently. So I think we should be taking that back and saying to officers, whoever drafts it, if we have, and very rarely do we need a Chair's recommendation, but if you have one, with all respect, it should come from you, Chair, I think, not the cabinet members.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. I've been in the training session for aspiring members of the panels, plus Andrew this morning, and I think that would certainly be the case, yeah. I think the independence of scrutiny is really important in terms of our effective function. Thank you.
Thank you. Just then going on looking at the substance of things. A couple of points there. I'm pleased that on page 31 or page 18 of the report, depending on which ones you're looking at, talking about more town centre living, not just student accommodation, it says. I don't know if officers have looked at those two buildings, for want of a better word, on the ring road next to what used to be the leisure centre. We have a former, I think it used to be the tax office or something there, which seemed to be just lights on and doing nothing. I would hope that we'd be able to look at those as the developers have done with Old Gatehouse opposite, if necessary, to bring them forward for short-term or permanent accommodation. I mean, potentially it could be something looked at as a master plan for that whole property to bring it in use, but because it seems strange wanting to develop the old sports centre corner. Key assets to build on, like many other things that we're faced with, the section where it says in Huddersfield, the football and Ruby teams. Well, obviously the football team is a very fluid asset at the moment, as we saw from last week, and I think we'll be expecting after Sunday's match with Man City, unless you believe who you're reading Wikipedia, unless you believe what Wikipedia tells me, but yeah, whether it's an asset or a liability, we shall have to see as things pan out. The asset to build on, and I notice there is, once again, an aspiration for Huddersfield to have a direct train service to London. Again, I will bring out again, surely, as an asset to build on for this council, should be the fact that we already have that connectivity. There should be no reason. It's a Kirklees strategy that we're looking at. It's not a Huddersfield and Dewsbury. And if you'll forgive me for taking one of the quotes, you know, we should be developing a strategy for the many, not just the two. So, where we have something which has a particular characteristic, the Home Valley has the tourism still going on from last of the summer wine. We have connectivity with London. We should be building on that so that other areas of Kirklees are benefiting. We're not just getting the two major towns doing it. We have also the what are we calling them? The actors, the anchor interviews, which seem to be predominantly public sector. I don't know if there's a reason for that, because again, throughout the district, we have many international thriving businesses. We have in Kirklees the European manufacturing centre of a multinational pharmaceutical industry. Their research facilities in Cambridge, but their manufacturing is in Kirklees. And I think, you know, we should be looking at businesses like that to make sure that we engage with them. Otherwise, if they feel left out and not included in things, then we might lose that. They might consolidate those down with Cambridgeshire. And I don't know, Peter, if you want to say more about the Transpennine route upgrade again this week.
Several things there. I don't know who wants to report.
Specific things, Alan, I think, needs to respond to. In broad terms, I take your point about this huge concentration on Huddersfield and Dewsbury. True, it's conscious. And it was particularly so when the resources were limited, so we put the priority where the many live. They do live in Huddersfield and Dewsbury. I think if the strategy, as I was walking over, I was saying to Alan, if the strategy is weak in any sense, it's because we didn't have the money to think wider and more priority to all the smaller towns and villages. So I accept that as a criticism. It's a criticism related to resources, though, our ability to be able to roll out sufficient across the whole of the borough. Alan will answer some of the more technical questions you raised.
I'll just follow on from that. And when the Thinking Places work is complete, that'll give us, I think one of the things is understanding what the roles of some of those places are, and we need to understand that better. And the Thinking Places work will give us a better understanding from that. And we've provided in a redraft of the KES to allow that Thinking Places work to come in, which will define better, maybe not for every place, but for the north and for the south of the district, as well as just Dewsbury and Huddersfield. On the point around the site you mentioned for town centre living, that site and others, absolutely, completely right. We've included that, if it's Crown House, I think we're talking about, we have included that in our own promotional material, which we've taken to MIPIM UK, which will go to MIPIM CAN. It's not a building we own or control, but we are promoting it as an opportunity for all those things. There has been some interest. At the end of the day, it's down to the owner, and we will try to influence that as much as we can, but the ultimate decision is down to the owner. And I think the final point, sorry, can you just remind me?
We can discuss Transpennine, but on the back of rail connectivity is, why are we not celebrating what we've had for 8 years, that connectivity at any other area? We go to Leeds and Wakefield and places, and one of the key things is you are only a short distance from London. And I remember when a delegation from Kirklees went down to meet a minister, the then leader of the council, the chief executive, and several others went to Wakefield to go to London. Their journey times door to door and the effectiveness would have been shorter if they'd have used the existing service. We should be celebrating that, saying to people, you can be within 3 hours into Kirklees.
I appreciate there is already good service to London going through Murfield, and we don't want to detract from that in any way. However, Grand Central does have aspirations, or others have aspirations, to put a service on through Huddersfield. Now, the many live in Huddersfield or have access to Huddersfield. What the Transpennine upgrade will involve is not merely improving that line, it means it begins to address the issue of the pinch point that Huddersfield Station is, and it enables it, when they've done the work, it will increase the capacity of Huddersfield, which is crucially important. And in so doing, gives more of our people a more direct link, potentially, to London. So it's not one or the other, it's both.
If I could interject there, I think it's a really important point. I think we need both. I think we need a good service from Mirfield, but I do think we need direct trains to Huddersfield. Yeah. Okay, if we can move on from that. I think the point you make about anchor institutions, about potentially having more from the private sector, I think is a good point. And I think with the inclusive growth group, I think at the moment there are too many people from the third sector or public sector. It would be good to have some more private sector companies there to give it greater balance. Right. Other people with questions? Andrew.
Maybe just coming on that point about private sector companies. The Cummins interview is interesting in that it is a private sector organisation. Yeah. It makes the point, which I think will apply to many others, that they're part of global supply chains and that influenceable spend locally is essentially smaller than the other institutions. So I think while we should broaden the portfolio of anchor institutions, we need to be cautious about that in terms of resources, because they're not necessarily going to be as effective as the public sector and voluntary sector. And if I could carry on, really pleased to see the ownership mentioned and the sharing of that. I wonder whether you've got any observations about how you intend to manage that into the future, because saying it's owned and delivered by the private and public sector together, how do you envisage managing that out into implementation to keep people engaged, keep people involved, to sharing priorities and sharing resources?
I don't think we know that yet. I think we've probably had goes at that in the past that haven't worked, and we need to learn from those mistakes. And we need to look at whether this is some version of a local strategic partnership or not. But we know that we need to do it differently. To answer your point about who's been involved, and again, Councillor Bolt mentioned it, be assured that we have spoken to businesses in this. They might not be specifically picked out, but Cummins and Syngenta of this world have been consulted on the CES. I think the point is around where the CES report kicks off in terms of our anchor employers for this, where we can have direct influence. That's where that's pick those other organisations out.
Another dimension of Andrew's question, he rightly says, and so how are you going to keep this up? The master plan for Huddersfield refers to an ongoing programme which will be rolled out over a period of time. So it's within that total process that the private sector will be engaged. And by private sector, I also include the public, who in a sense are outside the council, let's put it that way.
Yeah, thanks. So just to start with, well, thanks a lot for the document, both of them. Really good in many ways, and I think it is a step forward, from the earlier drafts, which you expect, which is great. With just in terms of the kind of main body of the text on the Kirklees environment economic strategy. So between page 23 to 34. You set out a series of priorities and accompanying action programmes, and you kind of highlight at the end in a box marked the shape of success, a key target. And I think, going back to what Peter was saying earlier about, about the structure, I think there's no doubt, it's very clear the linkages. But I would say, having said that, reading it, there were times when I did think there was a bit of conflation between aspiration and action, really, in the sense that, obviously an action is something, very specific, what will be done, when, how, by whom, and so on. And there was just a little kind of, I suppose what I'm trying to suggest is, it might be possible to clarify that a bit more in some areas. And if turning to page 35, okay, so this is obviously a key section because it concerns delivery, and I really welcome, obviously, what what you're quite rightly doing here is that you're linking kind of all the different players and actors that we would require to mobilise to actually to get these. But just in terms of at the bottom, there's a note where it says, at this point, all partner roles and timetables are provisional and subject to confirmation. Then over the page, it does say that this is going to be kind of firmed up by mid-2019. It's just really, I was just kind of, obviously this is going to be signed off in January, isn't it? This month, I believe, yeah. So I don't know if there's a way of firming that up a bit more, because obviously there's a bit of a disconnect there, isn't there? So
yeah. Thanks, Richard. I know, Alan, you already referred to an action plan. Yeah. So if you want to tell us a little bit more about that.
I think you hit the nail on the head a bit there about what the strategy needs to say and what needs to go in an action plan. And I think that the current revision is to try and make that clearer. You'll note that that's this is holding text at the minute. And I think that what we need to do is to get the strategy itself shorter and punchier and clearer, put the actions into a second document, but then the process around the actions, I think, does require more thought. It's going to Cabinet on the 22nd of January, it goes to the full Council in March. I don't think that what we'll be doing in terms of detail for the action plan will be ready by then. This is about the process of engagement, gaining the ownership and starting to do the work. But I take your point.
A big part of the action plan will depend on some variables that we don't have control of, like other resources coming in. So, for example, our aspiration with regard to the station is dependent on a £77 million bid to completely reconfigure the station. Now, if we don't get that money, or only get some part of it, it will affect the implementation. By the same token, the Chair and I are working very hard to develop an effective skills plan, which we've, I think, reasonably carefully thought through theoretically, how we make that operational. We are struggling with, and we're trying to work with the providers and with industry, and trying to get an engagement with industry to get an overall lock into this, and with the schools to ensure that the schools are giving the same sort of message as we want to. But all that is still, it's fluid to some extent. We're trying to make the fluid less fluid, but it's inevitably always going to be somewhat like that. And there are other examples I can give you. So it's one of the reasons why it still would appear to be, we haven't really thought. We have thought about it. We find it very difficult to specifically pin it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to say a little bit of what Richard just said there, really. So I just think, obviously, you're going to be working on this action plan. And as you do, that's going to take some time, but those, some clear, definable targets, I think is going to be crucial, really, to be able to measure, where we're going in terms of the economic strategy. So that'd be really helpful. Can I just ask specifically about the health and care sector, because that's an area that we're wanting to increase in. We're wanting to get more employment in this area, increase skills potentially. What is it specifically? Why are we focusing on this sector specifically, and what different levels of employment are you thinking about?
With the health sector, we're particularly concerned about their planning for skills. We're aware that possibly of all the jobs that will be available in, shall we say, 10, 15 years' time, 20% of those might well be in the care sector. What we're trying to do is ensure that where we have a control of the variable, i.e. we commission a great deal of work, we can ensure that the skills are appropriately developed within what we commission. But additionally, there are other providers of care much bigger than us. They're called the NHS. They're working as partners with us in providing primary health care. We can influence that, hopefully. The wider involvement of the NHS in that, we would try to engage in. I doubt we're ever going to get that far to, what you would say, jointly plan an overall strategy for skills in the NHS. But the more we can dovetail it, the better, and the more effective it will be in terms of providing employment for our people. That's one example.
You know, that's great to hear. I think particularly in the care sector, I think there's always been a concern around potentially the working conditions and wages and stuff. So anything that we're doing to try and elevate that, you know, absolutely, I'm totally on board. My mum was a care assistant at Kirklees, you know, and I saw the difference that she made, and we don't do enough to value those roles and ensuring that the people that are doing it have the right skills and the wage to follow it. So I, you know, really do support that we're doing that. Hopefully we're going to, you know, have some really clear targets in terms of wage, what we expect from when we're commissioning out these contracts, what we expect in terms of wages, what we expect in terms of conditions. I spoke to David about this. I'd really like to see us looking at things like the real living wage. I know we're actually at the same level at the moment as the real living wage, and I'd really like to look at us moving forward, committing to things like this and make sure that we're supporting our staff, you know, people who work with us through commissioners.
Yeah, I never know how close to move this is over. It's the scary things. Anyway, right. Yeah, okay. I think Harpreet's just said something that I was going to, because actually, I think it's one of the best bits of this. I really agreed with that aspiration of, you know, of getting caring as a career, as a profession, because that's really what it should be. It's one of the most important jobs anyone can do. Anyway, some more specific issues, really. Okay, so just kind of turning now to some of the recommendations made in the Clares report. Okay, I mean, just one thing, I think you're absolutely right, that you said earlier, David, there is definitely, you can see the interconnections between the Clares report and the case, and that's really welcome and really important. I think, however, having said that, it's almost more of a presentational thing. It might even be worth, it's just a suggestion, but highlighting perhaps a bit more concretely at times, you know, how they do interconnect. I mean, you can see them, but it, you know, it could be spelled out a bit clearer. But that's more presentation maybe than anything. So I just wanted to look at some of the specific recommendations. Okay, so the first recommendation is the recommendation 10, which is on page 67 of the report, and that refers to the use of business rates as a means of actually affecting change. And I think that's really important, because we all know that, you know, changing behaviours, well, you've either got the carrot or the stick, haven't you? And business rates can be an effective. So, but I just wanted, now obviously what Clares are interested in here, and quite rightly, is you know, encouraging new businesses and encouraging economic growth. But as Peter said earlier, you know, I think one thing that's built into this strategy is cross-referencing with other council policies and other council strategies. And so, for example, you know, in council yesterday we discussed issues around recycling, which I would have thought would be, you know, very open to using business rates to discourage things, you know, excessive use of plastics and stuff like that. And also, of course, we also passed a climate emergency motion as well, in terms of, so again, that could, you know, in terms of environmental issues. So I don't know whether it might be possible to actually, because they are part of our, they will be part of our economic strategy moving forward, inevitably, you know, both those issues around recycling environment. So that was recommendation 10. The other recommendation 8, again on page 67, Yeah, it's really good. The only suggestion I wanted to raise, really, was I don't see a reference to trade unions there. And, I think it might be worthwhile as well in terms of, actually kind of getting input as well from employees through the unions, but that's just a thought. And recommendation 7, which is on page 66. Now, as we know, the whole local wealth building kind of approach has 2 strands to it. There's a strategic strand, which is really, I think, very ably covered in this report, and there's also a grassroots building, local wealth building strand where you build kind of, co-ops, mutuals, local businesses, family businesses that root wealth in the communities. So I just wanted, obviously, in this, Peter was rightly saying this is a work, and Alan was saying this is a work in progress, and that's got to be right. But just one suggestion that has been done in Preston and in quite a number of other local authorities is that there have been moves to develop agencies, like a co-op development agencies, as a vehicle, because what worries me, without a specific vehicle, and they can be actually very cheap to integrate, but without a specific vehicle to drive forward that second strand of development, there's a danger it remains an aspiration. So that was just a specific suggestion, really. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to mention the climate emergency in a link to procurement, which is mentioned in here. Climate emergency and carbon footprint, we should be looking at and maybe tie it into the procurement thing. And although it says organisations like Cal, University and indeed this Council have a strong approach to local procurement, if anybody wants to have a look at the back of this very room, we'll find that the water that we are being given in bottles is Harrogate spring water, one of the biggest suppliers of bottled and branded water is Shepley Spring in the Kirkburton ward. So if we talk about reducing the council's impact, supporting local businesses, well, it may be in the city region, Peter, but it's not in Kirklees, so you have to, charity. So if we could look at local procurement. In the transport, Peter, it's mentioned in the transport strategies, and it's something which I know you and I have spoken and supported, but again, the transport connectivity in here is predominantly east-west. We need to be making sure, as we've made the point at West Yorkshire, if we can't translate it to our own, there is a strong north-south connection through the Penistone line, which potentially will link, should it ever happen, to HS2. That is an essential corridor that we need to be. In terms of the economy, we've talked about events, and there's talk about a mid-size event. I think we need also to be looking out of having a building. We don't want a new event dome or anything like that. We have many facilities. And I was at a parliamentary event on Tuesday, which sadly wasn't attended by many parliamentarians who were busy somewhere else. But the Secretary-General of the Circus Proprietors Organisation was saying they've tried for some time to get sites in Huddersfield, and particularly Greenhead Park, and have found it difficult. Now, that is an additional cultural, entertainment and social offer that we could be looking to bring, that will bring money into this district. It brings people in. I'm pleased to see the reference to bringing empty and listed buildings, and I'm sure it will be in there, but particularly when we talk about the Station Gateway, the George Hotel should be something that isn't being allowed to go into rack and ruin, and like other listed buildings, sadly, decays or gets a fire or something. We need to make sure that's brought back into some use. The big build, and I'd like to see some policy put into practice here. We talk about environmental corridors, we need to be pressing to developers that our linkages for walking, cycling and other routes and active travel are really embedded. There was a planning application went through on a former rail corridor in Hetmondwike where the developer had suggested that the active travel route was at the bottom of people's drives, between people's driveways and the roadway. Well, that's ridiculous. Yeah, we should be building on the success that we've had of having dedicated and separate routes from that. The issue of the living wage has been mentioned. I think, again, that might need to be embedded. Take a lesson from Huddersfield University, who have a living wage environment. Not only do they say that they will pay, but they insist that everybody involved in their supply chain, be they builders or whatever, has that down to their subcontractors. And the council could take that approach as well, as we're investing and saying, right, not only quite rightly is the council going to do that, but we will insist that everybody that we deal with buys into that. I think some interesting points.
Just on page 2, it talks about a location that puts the Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield City regions on our doorstep. Peter has mentioned that Harrogate's in the Leeds City region, Huddersfield is as well, and I was just intrigued to know whether you think you're getting as much as you can out of being part of the city region. So the way that's framed is as if we're independent of it, and Leeds City region is mentioned a few times through here, but it doesn't necessarily feel like we've embraced the fact that we're part of it, and we want to be sort of almost do our own thing. Well, that's very, very noble, but you know, are we getting the benefit? Are we trying to get as much benefit from being in the region as we could?
The very straight answer to that.
Peter, just before you respond, there's a heck of a lot of questions then. We are really running out of time. I wonder if these... Obviously, you will have noted these comments. I don't think we've got time to respond to all these different things. I don't know if there's anything that is absolutely burning that you've got to respond to now, or are other things that can be noted and you could perhaps get back to individuals. Yeah, is that okay? I'm just thinking about. Yeah. Right.
So the wording's been critical rather than the meaning that you would want to intend, we do intend. Let's put it that way. Do you see what I mean? Because in terms of city region, massively involved, hugely aware of the success and our integral part within that. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter, Alan and David, for coming along today, and thanks for the work that's gone into these documents since we've last seen them. I think you've made some impressive progress, and I hope to have a look at how things are going when the action plan's been put to place. And as you've made the point, Peter, any good action plan has got to be something that's constantly updated as situations change. So thank you. Yeah, that's great. Right, okay, so we're moving on to item 5 now, which is the homeless strategy consultation. Right, okay. Right, and I'm sorry that you've had to wait. No, just apologising to Ellen and Karen. Right, okay, so we're moving on to this strategy. Homelessness and housing generally is something that we've spent a lot of time on really over the last 18 months or so. So it's very pleasing to see this really detailed strategy coming to the meeting today. If you would like to introduce yourselves, just for the benefit of the people who might be watching externally, and then I know you're just going to give us a quick overview of things. Thank you.
I'm Helen Galdart, I'm the Head of Housing Services.
I'm Karen Oates, I'm Housing Commissioning Manager. Okay, what I'll do is just a very brief overview, because obviously you will have had the strategy, so it'd be good to get your feedback, really. So this new strategy replaces the previous strategy, which was developed in 2013, and it's very much been developed in line with the requirements of the Housing Reduction Act, the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017, and the government's rough sleeping strategy. A couple of key principles, really, to the development of the strategy. One, which has been very much a partnership approach, and we've particularly worked with the Kirklees Homelessness Forum, which is a multi-agency group. And some of the data within the strategy evidences the strength of that partnership working, and that's very much something we want to maintain and build on moving forward. I think it's also important to note that we've worked sort of co-productively with people who have lived experience of homelessness in terms of looking at some of the themes that are emerging from the strategy. And we held a workshop event with customers at Clare House in Huddersfield to get their thoughts and inputs into the direction of the strategy. So it very much supports the overarching aims and ambitions for housing in Kirklees, and it links directly with the wider Kirklees outcomes for people and place, including improved health and well-being and people's own financial resilience, really, through increasing their independence and people's access to training, learning and employment through the prevention of homelessness. Two key points, really, that I think the strategy does sort of try and bring out. One is very much that the ownership of the preventing homelessness agenda is and must be very much partnership-based across the council and the wider partnership. The council cannot prevent homelessness on its own. And I think the second key principle that the strategy tries to bring out is that focus on effective and early and integrated intervention and prevention. So in other words, having a focus on those groups of people who are maybe more vulnerable to homelessness and getting in early before a crisis develops. So in partnership, what the strategy has developed is two key priority themes, and they are the prevention of homelessness coupled with improved interagency working and tackling rough sleeping, where we want to get people off the streets as quickly as possible and also, importantly, avoid people drifting back onto the streets. I won't sort of go through all of the actions that the strategy sets out, because obviously they are there for you to have a look at. What I think we'd really welcome now is your sort of comments and feedback. Thank you.
I think just to sort of say, obviously, we have, as you said right at the beginning, been to the scrutiny panel and talked to members over the last few months, and some of the comments and ideas that have come from scrutiny we've tried to weave into the strategy as we've developed it as well. So we hope that you can see some of those reflected. But obviously, any final comments from you would be really helpful. Just to say that we are getting to the final stages now of developing the strategy. So the plan is that we are aiming to get to Cabinet on the 19th of February and then to full council for approval on the 20th of March. So, as I say, we're getting to the final stages, and really any final comments would be very gratefully received.
Right, thank you, Helen. Yeah, and I hope we have made some difference in terms of earlier comments. So, open to the panel. Any comments on this final draft of the work? Yes. Harpreet.
Thank you for your presentation, and also thank you for the report. I think there's some really good stuff for us here, so, I welcome the information that you've provided in terms of, I think the co-production thing is absolutely vital, and it's really good that we are speaking with people who have a lived experience of rough sleeping, of homelessness, because we can't fully understand that situation if you're not in it. So I think that's absolutely vital. So I'm really happy that you're doing that, and that's something that we should all congratulate you on. So that's brilliant. And the use of the forum, I think, is absolutely excellent. So well done on that as well. The partnership thing is going to be key, isn't it? Because there's so many things around rough sleeping, in particular also with homelessness, so how we work with our private rented sector partners. On top of that, you've got issues with the welfare system, obviously, which is causing you horrendous problems, no doubt, and particularly with mental health services and drug and alcohol services. And I think that is mentioned throughout this, and I think that's going to be the key one. And I think you have gone into that as well in this report. In terms of, I'm sorry, I know I'm going on about different things here, but I just wanted to ask about the housing first model. So what it's saying here is there's a commitment to consideration of it, and I hope we would try and pilot this before the final report comes out. Can we say that we are, can we put some stronger wording around that, or is something that needs to be considered?
I think it's something that we could actually now firm up a little bit, because we do know that the council has been successful in attracting some government funding to help us in this area. So it probably won't be on stream until later on in next year, or this year now actually. But we could now firm that up to sort of say that we will be doing that. Yes, so thank you for that.
Just one more thing on rough sleeping, really. I think that's where it's really visible when we think about homelessness. And I know homelessness and rough sleeping are actually quite different things, but a lot of us see it through rough sleeping. And I think there is a feel sometimes when you're walking around the town, it feels like there's more rough sleepers on the street. And I've just mentioned this before to yourselves as well. It's just about us being able to ensure that we're doing everything we can in terms of picking up rough sleepers when they're out and about, but that we assure as a council that when people are on the streets, that our partner organisations are helping us in terms of that street support, because that's not always visible, I think, to a member of the public. So again, I think the more that we can do about promotion of that. I know the SWEP protocol is in place today. It's something that I've shared on my social media, and it's great that you're sending that through to councillors so we can make sure that we're sending that information out as well. One of the things which would be quite useful for us to know, I think, is once the SWEP provision is over, us understanding how many people might have taken up the SWEP provision. So if that's something that could be provided in your report back to council as well, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a point really on how together we support people who may be on the streets and sleeping rough. Again, back to the Kirklees Homelessness Forum. What the forum has developed is something called a good practice outreach guide, which actually brings together the sort of the increasing range of groups and agencies who are working together to support people who may be rough sleeping, and try to take a more cohesive approach. So that we avoid the risk of maybe duplication or groups working sort of at cross purposes almost, and that we try and coordinate that work much more effectively. And that actually is going to be formally launched, and it will be available or there'll be a link to it on the council's website, so people can actually see what's the best way to support people in that situation. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really positive to see this partnership working, developing and really bearing fruit. Yes, Martin, did you?
Yeah, thanks. The strategy is quite interesting. I know sometimes we're looking at the actual delivery because, as we've talked about before, the number of rough sleepers, and as you mentioned, rough sleepers and homeless, almost confusing to put it in one report because they do require different interventions. The 2018 survey said 2018 said we have 13 rough sleepers now. I think the strategy, and it talks about, towards the end of it, about ending on page 101, building on and strengthening our partnerships so we end rough sleeping. And I think that should be the aim, although it talks later in the narrative about a guide that's produced, the good practice guide, whilst it will not end rough sleeping. So there's almost a contradiction there, that we are quite rightly wanting to end rough sleeping, but the outreach good practice alone hopefully when we're doing some of this work, the case studies that we talk about, the people's personal experiences, talk about how they're being helped out of it. How many of these 13 people are long-term rough sleepers that were there the year, through previous years? And why are interventions not being, what is it about interventions that are leaving us with 18 people living on the street in this day and age and in this weather? Now, there was one case highlighted where there were family members saying they've tried and the person was happy living under the railway bridges, whether that's true or not. But I think with 18 people, hopefully we could have 18 case studies, if you like, to tell us why. Then we can look at what interventions are needed to put that person in a place of safety, whether they want to be in formal housing or some authorities have used adopted buildings so that these people have sleeping pods, if you like, because again, one of the case studies is they were concerned, if not scared, about the people that were in the same accommodation with them. When people have been living a solitary lifestyle, to put them into something a bit more ordered is a big step. So I think the strategy needs to have some kind of aspiration or measurable outcome at the end of it. Because it says there on page 101 that we end rough sleeping. If we come back after a year and we've still got rough sleepers, then we have to look at what we need to have measurable out, short, medium and long term. That's when you coming back and said, how is this going to achieve it?
Yeah, from conversations I've had sort of preparing for meetings and the information we got back at the last scrutiny meeting, I think a lot of that information is available. It's just thinking about how you would present it in an appropriate manner. But I think you may be right that in terms of the general public being aware of what's happening, it would probably give them a better understanding of the issue. Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I think you're right. I think, and of course, the 13 that we talk about, or the numbers that we talk about there, are on a particular night. So we do know that there may be other people that are in and out of rough sleeping. I don't know off the top of my head whether any of those 13 were still there last year, and people do come in and out all the time. So we need to stop that revolving door and understand what it is that's making people, and I think your comment about people being ready to live in a certain environment is really appropriate to say, because we're trying to think about what is the best solution for people, and it's not always the same thing. So we need to look at the different interventions that people will engage with us on, because part of the problem that we have is that people are not ready to engage and pick up some of the options or solutions that we might at the moment have available to offer to them. So it is about looking at the different options that are available for different people at different times in their lives. We've actually made a bid for some government funding to try and help us to increase our outreach work so that we can do much more of that proactive engagement with people who are sleeping. And we're hopeful that we will be successful in that bid, and if not, we'll need to look at other ways in which we can actually achieve that outcome.
Very welcoming. We don't want to be wasting time and resources. I know that through the Methodist Mission and that, they had street angels. When I was mayor, I went out one evening with a group of people who provide support not only to rough sleepers, but obviously people who properly been enjoying the nighttime economy a bit. So there are people, and those people have, because of their interaction, have a relationship with the rough sleepers. They knew them all by name. So rather than us having to go through that, it's probably worth touching base with the existing volunteers and support and saying, right, can you help us kick-start this?
Yeah, which I think is the kind of thing that's been happening, isn't it? Which is a good aspect of what's going on, really. Andrew, yeah.
It's pleasing to know that the house building plan in Deliver Big Build in the previous paper, in terms of the total number of houses we built, does exceed the number on page 13 of your report. But there's no explicit affordable housing percentage in the Big Build action in the previous report. And it would suggest from your analysis that we need to make that 50% if we're going to really address the challenge of not rough sleeping, homelessness in a broader context. And I just wonder whether that's something we want to put back to our economic colleagues consultations on economic regeneration and neighbourhoods.
Yeah, I suppose that does link as well to the housing strategy, which has come to this meeting, but probably before you joined us. But one of the sessions, we had a look at an analysis of housing need, and that clearly pointed out that of the houses that we needed, at least half of those needed to be affordable. But at delivering that, I agree, it is a big challenge. It's possibly something that we need still to do more work on. Helen, do you want to respond to that? Yeah.
I was just going to say the same thing. I think that the economic strategy is the overarching strategy for the council, then the housing strategy sits beneath that, and then this strategy supports that as well. But we do need to make sure that they do tie up, and that we are trying to, look at the numbers. But yes, we certainly do need more social and other affordable housing across the district to try and help solve some of the problems. It is worth noting that not all the problems that homeless individuals or rough sleepers in particular have necessarily are about the accommodation and a roof over the head, because it's very complex. But we still do need a significant amount of new affordable housing in the district.
Yeah. If I could ask a question. The Homelessness Reduction Act that came in last year has obviously placed more statutory duties on local authorities. Do you feel that we have the resources to deliver that effectively within the authority?
When government introduced the Homelessness Reduction Act, they actually gave local authorities some new burdens money to help local authorities to introduce the new act. So we have benefited from that new burdens money, so that it was over 2 years, over 3 years, if that makes sense, so 6 months, 1 year and 6 months. So we're now sort of towards the end. It came into force in April this year, so we've done the first few quarters. So we've still got the staff at the moment. We've got new IT systems to help us to deal with that, to try and ensure that we are able to manage dealing with that. The problem will be, or the issue will be, can we sustain that once we lose the additional resources that we have? And clearly we'll keep a close eye on that to make sure that we are able to deal with people that are approaching us for assistance with their housing and homelessness.
Similar kind of question. The report mentions 6.5 million funding for a life chances funding. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? About what's going to happen as a result of that work?
Yeah, that was a successful bid, I believe. The Life Chances Fund is national funded, and it's through something called a social investment bond. So it's kind of a new way of funding, really. And I believe that Kirklees' bid was one of the largest successful bids in the country, so that was really welcome. And what that will do essentially is will allow the council to remodel and then go out to commission a range of what you might call floating support services, or what's sometimes called outreach support services. And those services work with people who are vulnerable to homelessness and who have other complex issues and needs. Very much around an enabling approach to really just get people back on the right track, if you like, so that they can then find and keep a settled home. So I think at the moment colleagues are in the process of working at what those services will look like, and then they will go out to tender in due course. But that will be very welcome. That money is very welcome and will be a real asset, I think.
Just to add to that, that's where the Housing First principles comes in. It's through that pot of money.
Right, thanks very much for coming along yet again. Helen, I'm not sure how many times you've been here, but it seems like almost every meeting. Thanks very, very much. And as I said earlier, I think this is a really excellent support. It shows the quality of the work that's been undertaken within the authority to tackle what is it's a massive problem, I think, we've got some big challenges, really, to deal with both homelessness and rough sleeping. So, thank you. To move on to item 6, which is waste and recycling strategy. So, Will and Laurie, do you want to come down to the front? Right, thank you. So, at the full council meeting last night, the three of us who were councillors had the benefit of seeing this. Andrew, I've already apologised, and I think that you were having to acquaint yourself with it fairly quickly. But I think, Laurie, you're going to give an overview, aren't you, of the key points, really, of the new strategy. So, welcome to you both to the meeting. If you'd like to just introduce yourselves for people who are looking at this externally. I don't know if you want to say something first, Councillor Mather, before we go into the presentations.
Thank you. So shall I introduce myself? So I'm Nahid Mather, portfolio holder for environment and communities. Thank you for inviting the service to come and talk to you. As you mentioned, unfortunate or fortunate that we spoke about this at the full council last night. And we're here to introduce the council's waste strategy, which we've been waiting for the government to announce. And the government's strategy was announced back in December the 18th last year. It is a step change. It requires lots of innovation. It gives us lots of opportunities, and it actually concentrates on areas like waste prevention and minimisation, reuse, recycling, recovery and disposal. And I can say I'm quietly confident that we can step up to the plate, but I'll leave it to Laurie to do the presentation and then wait for the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, I can take this in lots of different tacks. I can go through the entire presentation again. I think some of you will have seen it last night, so I don't want to bore you with it and take up too much of your time. Or we could just go through kind of any key points that you think you want to learn a little bit more about. What I thought was quite interesting, I'd looked through the webcast this morning, and I've taken a lot of detailed notes of all the views that were raised. All of that will get fed into consultations. Yes, there's quite a bit of different stages of consultation that we'll go through, and that was incredibly positive, I found, last night, so that was really good. Are there any, given you didn't have the time perhaps in advance to look through the different slides and the different information from national consultation, are there any particular questions that you want to raise that I can cover in a little bit more detail at this stage?
Could I just abuse my privilege as chair? I think with this was kind of brought up last night about the title of this is a waste strategy. In a way, it's quite a complex process because the Green Paper came and it's setting forward aspirations, but it's also asking questions really to local authorities about what local authorities and other people think about the things that they're putting forward. So we've got to respond to that. At the same time, we've got the issue of renewing the waste contract, and we've also got to respond to the Green Paper, and we've got to put together our own plans for waste minimisation and recycling and so on. So, could you just start off by giving us an outline of what the timeline is likely to be over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of the work that we've got to do, just so we can be clearer about that?
Yep, so we've got, this year, we're spending a lot more time doing background documents and preparing the waste strategy itself. So the strategy will essentially be the vision of Kirklees. And in the background, we'll have things like TEEP, so there's some technical documents we need to complete. There's consideration of all the council documents and processes like place-based learning. So this year will be a lot about not just the government consulting on the national strategy, but we'll be doing the consultation on the Kirklees strategy. So that's 2019. What we'll also need to be doing this year will be preparing for re-procurement of the contract, as you've alluded to. But we can't necessarily do that until we know what our vision is. So the specification for that contract, we don't want to preempt what the decision will be for the Kirklees strategy. So probably more looking at 2020 before we're looking at the disposal contract in a little bit more detail. Once we're understanding what we're wanting out of the strategy, next year in 2020, we'll probably be, sorry, let me just go back to 2019. Carl presented some short-term options for you that we will be rolling out this year. So those are, I think it's probably one of the last slides, the last few slides. So we've talked about green bin monitoring, we've talked about chargeable garden waste, the Save Food, Save Money workshops, the school education programme and the composting. So that will take place in 19. And we'll review all of those and feed those into the strategy depending on what we thought was useful for us as a council. In 2020 is when we're planning for a new collection system and whatever else we've decided we're wanting to change. We need quite a bit of time to do that. It involves bringing in potentially different bins, different vehicles. Managing all of those different changes will probably take quite a while. The disposal contract, we may need to tweak certain things before the contract end. How amenable the contract and the contractor is to that will all need to be decided next year and towards the latter half of this year. So we're then 2021. If we can start introducing a new collection system, if that's where we want to go, we could perhaps start at the end of 2020, but really, if we're really taking the time to plan it properly, it'll probably look more like 2021 in my view. But all to be revealed, I suppose, really at this early stage. 2023 is when our disposal contract formally comes to an end. But we have a 5-year contract extension option that we can discuss with Suez. So that's why there's that 23 to 28 frame in the presentation that Carl provided to you. So is that enough of a frame with regards to the next 5 years?
Thank you.
Okay.
It is very complex, though. I realise that things like the collection system, in a way, it would be foolish for us to do something too radical before we get the clear guidelines from government, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
that might change.
that's right. Well, the national government document, they're doing a number of different consultations this year and next, and then that will all need to be wrapped up into new legislation, and then publication of the National Waste Strategy will be done again in 2023. Unfortunately, this council, we can't wait until 2023. We have quite a bit ending, particularly for the disposal contract. Quite a bit is coming to an end. It'll take a number of years to prepare for that new disposal contract, so we can't really wait until that final strategy. And the waste environment and markets change in that time anyway. So it's something that we really do need to focus on sooner rather than later.
Thank you for that. I think this is actually quite complex, isn't it? Because of our own contract timelines, the way the government's doing its sort of strategy and in consultation engagement exercise. So the timelines are a bit complex for us, really. I think what we'd probably all say is we are going to have to change our delivery system in terms of waste disposal. There's no doubt about that with the things that are coming in from government. So just a couple of things I wanted to ask you, just generally about how you'll be, I mean, you won't have this all pinned down yet, but your engagement strategy, because there was a good point made yesterday, wasn't there, about the fact that, I think Carl made it, this is one of the council services which every resident engages with, you know, so everyone's going to have something to say about the bins, aren't there? So, you know, and you're going to have a lot of views within that. So the engagement strategy that goes alongside your sort of review of disposal and waste generally is going to be crucial. So if you can say anything about that, I mean, I know you probably won't go into detail so much. Also about how you consider climate change within the strategy. I think that's going to be crucial, but particularly because we passed a motion yesterday about the impact of climate change and little time that we do have to try and make a difference ourselves. And I think it's an area where we can show leadership as a council for this borough. And just one other point is about the cultural change that we're going to have to do, because I believe the disposal system is going to have to be very different to what we've got now, and that is going to take a massive culture change, as you've mentioned. So your leading time for that culture change is going to be key as well. And if maybe a little bit that you can say around that as well.
Okay, so first, engagement strategy. That's with our communications team at the moment. So we do have a project team that's been pulled together to try to formulate that. What we have kind of in the more immediate plans is to do party briefings. And I think, Councillor Mather, you mentioned that last night at the meeting. So that's where we'll start. I envisage we'll probably be doing community events of some sort. And I know there are some community groups that are keen to do that as well. So there might be some community events which are fantastic, kind of popping up and helping us to change that culture and understand those benefits in a bit more detail. So the engagement strategy will include the widest possible group that we can, and all of that will be taken into account. Climate change,
I just wanted to mention, in relation to communication strategy, we do have quite a lot of intelligence in relation to the way we've been working, the bin rounds, and what people do, and commercial waste disposal on our household disposal sites. So we will be using some of that alongside the current menu, if you can call it, in relation to putting together a waste strategy.
Sorry, if I could just come in on the engagement bit as well. I think what's important is we're not just engaging internally, we're also engaging outwards as well. So we've already engaged with DEFRA, with RAP, at a combined authority level as well, looking at other waste PFIs we have in the region, how we might be able to work together better. So you're right, there's inside and there's outside that we're both aware of and working to.
If I could just bring it back to the practical level, as somebody who uses the bins every day, the only place I see a recycling percentage published is if I drive to one of your tips, and there's quite an old sign with a sort of a vague percentage showing, with a bit of a thank you sometimes. I've never seen any publicity about how many plastic bottles we've diverted, or these plastic bottles were converted into something else. So there seems to be a lack of sort of energy in encouraging people to try a little bit harder, because I know from talking to people there's enormous confusion about what can go in the green bin. At least in this part of the country, the green bin is a green bin. Elsewhere, it's grey for bizarre reasons. What sort of plastic bottle and what does it end up being turned into? I think there's a lot of cynicism out there that people think we do all this sorting out and collecting and you just burn it all. And it isn't actually getting around into sort of a proper recycling loop. So that's sort of one question. The second question was engaging the schools. This is going to be a longish haul to get people's culture change. One sure way of getting parents to change their behaviour is through their kids. And I know there's a lot of environmental education in schools, but lining that up with what you're doing and having a consistent package of information for schools will seem a way of influencing their parents. And having somebody on the end of your arm who is encouraging you not to throw it away, or not to dump it, or don't buy that one, will happen and will effectively change behaviour, I think, relatively easily. So I think the schools engagement. My third question was, is there any data about what you've done so far to restrict, reduce capability to dispose of bulky refuse and other items, and its impact on fly tipping and disposal in public spaces? As I walk around this area, I'm appalled in small bits of woodland and waste ground where there's half a house full of stuff, often white goods, grey electrical goods and furniture just cast, and then black bins thrown into the hedgerows, the removal of which is much more expensive than providing effective disposal mechanisms at hand for people. So they're my three areas of comment, please.
Yeah, so there are three areas there. I guess there are your two about climate change and cultural change as well, part of which is in.
Sorry.
So, just with regards to your communication points, the first two, I think you're absolutely right. So the how we communicate and what we communicate to residents is insufficient, and we probably need to improve that. So that's what the comms team is doing at the moment with regards to improving how we're communicating to residents, making it clear what is recyclable and what isn't. All of that has already been highlighted and will be part of that comms strategy and will come very, very soon with regards to clarifying it. We did a big programme on during Recycling Week in September, whereby we did a lot of those already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the web hits that we wanted to get, whether or not it was just because people were busy or whatever, but it's doing it in a way that's going to engage a bit better perhaps, so we can deal with that one. So if I go back to climate change, I think what was mentioned last night with regards to the district heating, that helps us make best use of the energy from waste facility. We're completing kind of a second phase feasibility study, which helps us complete an outline business case for the heat network. So that's still ongoing, and that helps us manage our climate change a bit better. With regards to having and I'm going to use the phrase EFW, which is energy from waste facility. Having an EFW helps us manage our waste locally. There are still across England a lot of local authorities that will ship it to other countries, Scandinavian countries, whereby that creates quite a big carbon impact because you're sending it to a bulking facility. That bulking facility is sending it to a containerised facility, and so on. So the proximity principle was quite key when we developed this facility back in the late 90s, and that still applies. And we're very highly regulated by the Environment Agency and how we run that facility. With regards to when we're looking at our collections and whether or not how we want to change that, the impact on climate change will be considered. So there's something called a strategic environmental assessment that will form one of the background documents that we'll do to ensure that as a whole, all of our waste management solutions provide the best possible environmental impact, not just carbon, but all the other emissions that are included. So that's climate change. On culture change, again, it's a little bit like the engagement strategy. It is important and it does take a long time. We can't expect residents to behave in a certain way today and in a different way tomorrow. Some of the solutions are easy and they're engaging and they are incentivised. Some might need to be a little bit stronger. So where we're talking about what are we doing to restrict bulky waste and to restrict fly tipping, there are answers that are a little bit more engaging, so we can educate the communities, which is what we do now, to help residents, help the council to report issues and to help us with the evidence base. But there are also some elements which is in the strategy when we're talking about it was this one, review of regulations. Those will help us have a stronger enforcement base as well to help us tackle the real culprits. We can create as robust as possible a waste solution, and all of that will be taken into account as part of the waste strategy. So I'm not saying that we'll just be enforcing everything. There will have to be kind of a wider engagement with regards to all of our waste provision, not just curbside collection, but also household waste sites, so controlled waste regulations. I think that'll have an impact on how we'll manage those sites as well in future. The bulky waste collection service, there might be something that we can do, potentially working with community groups. I know that kind of more positive engagement with communities was mentioned last night. There may be some opportunities in that we could look at.
Could I just interject there? I do know there are a number of community groups, as Laurie knows, because you've already started discussions with them who are really interested in this. And one of the things they want to look at are other areas where community groups have put together schemes to do just that, to reuse bulky items in a different way. Yeah. So hopefully that's something we might look at further, I think. Yeah.
So just to comment on that community point, there's also things we're doing in the interim. So we're working close with K&H. We're looking at exploring putting reuse shop provision on in the interim period as well. So it's not just all about waiting for when the strategy arrives. We're trying to build these little steps in as we go. Because you're right, it's about culture change and it's not overnight. It's about building that message, almost that branding of what is Kirklees, what do we stand for, what's our ambition and the vision, and then how we slowly move back towards that. So some of the things that I know was mentioned last night about climate change and proximity and anaerobic digestion plants was mentioned. And one of the problems we have is we do have one in district, but it's full. The next nearest one we found is Derbyshire. So some things that are going to be very important to what we do as a council. So some of the first things maybe we invest in building our own anaerobic digester within the district, but we might talk to our neighbours and build it big enough to take some of the region. So it's all important factors that we will be taking into account.
It also depends on where our neighbours are in relation to waste strategy, waste collection and disposal, because a lot of them, our neighbours have newer contracts, so they may have already incorporated their own thinking around that, whereas we were first in getting our contract on the table. That's why we got all the awards and everything. And so now we're coming to an end. We're having to adjust, amend, and think of innovative ways until we get to a point where we will have a new strategy, a new contract, which will help us deliver for our residents and the expectations placed on us by a central government, and also taking on board a lot of the creative ways of where we bring our communities alongside us. So if we're talking about recycling, a lot of the things they may be interested in doing for themselves or doing with us, with our support and assistance.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suppose it's about 7 years ago, time flies, but we gave up collecting and recycling glass. Now, I get a lot of comments and queries from my residents in my ward about why don't we recycle glass. Can you advise me how to answer them?
I can try. So I think the glass recycling was taken away in 2010. Does that sound about right? I think it was around that. That was purely due to it was budget requirements at the moment, the savings that needed to be made. I think at this point in time, when we're looking at what needs to be collected, glass absolutely needs to be considered with regards to availability for residents to be able to collect from the household rather than having to bring it to a bring site. But we would want to at the same time maintain as many as possible of the bring site facilities so that the community can engage as well on that level. So I think glass is something that we certainly need to consider as part of this and potentially bring in at the curbside.
I also wanted to say we still have glass collection. We have bottle banks, and we have a contract where it's nil cost to the council, so we don't actually get to say we recycle this much because somebody else is doing it for us, and that was for cost reasons. And going forward, we will definitely have to reconsider including that in order to make up the percentage of recycling that's been the expectation of government, which is 50% and then going up to 55%, and hopefully in this borough it will be more, a lot higher, say looking ahead 10 to 15 years. So yes, we are still recycling glass at nil cost. Moving forward, we will be recycling glass within our own facilities and using that percentage of recycling to boost up our overall percentage.
Harpreet and then Andrew. Yeah. Well, I'll let you think about it. Andrew, come in first. Yeah.
Last question. I mean, I don't understand. Is glass recycling actually an economic proposition, or is it again sort of greenwash?
Glass recycling is actually financially viable. There are still markets in this country for glass recycling. We send ours to Barnsley, I think. UK Glass collect our glass, and the way we collect it is of fantastic economic value for the council. But the fact that it actually gets processed and managed within Yorkshire is quite advantageous. I think the materials that provide an income are glass and metals at the moment. All the others it varies. The market goes up and down. So what we're trying to do from a financial perspective, even if you put environment to one side, recycling all of those materials is far beneficial over putting it in the energy from waste facility. We've got more waste than we can fit in the facility, and if we're not processing it in the facility, you're then sending it to landfill, and that's got a massive landfill tax and environmental disbenefits as well.
Yeah, it's just in this communications thing, people knowing that the glass isn't going to benefit and it's recycled inside Yorkshire. It's an easy headline. I've never heard that before. It'd be really, really good to communicate.
And I think just picking up on the national strategy.
Happen in the UK. So what we offer is free household waste site disposal to householders, not to businesses, to householders. So residents do have an outlet for getting rid of waste. They need to find a way of getting it there, which can be difficult for some residents, but we make it as easy as possible. So you can see if a friend can bring you, and all you need to do is bring a bit of paper to demonstrate you're a Kirklees householder. So we do make we've got a permit system to keep businesses out, because we need to manage our council tax bill. There are systems for people who can't get there as well as they can. There's the bulky waste collection service as well that we could use. When we can consider amnesty. I'm not ruling it out by any stretch of the means. It is something we can think about. But when you offer things that make it very easy for residents to get rid of general waste, you're undermining reuse and minimisation. So Oxfam, for example, or British Heart Foundation could have made really good use of that couch. Why in the world have you thrown it away? We want people to behave differently. We want people to think. We don't want them to just put it in a certain location and expect the council to look after it. We want them to say, actually, I replaced my couch, but actually someone else might be able to make perfectly good use of it. It doesn't. So it's just those sorts of things that we'd want to consider. Does that answer your question?
No. I think let's just pick up on your couch example. Sorry to pick on that, but there are also issues with disposal of some of that soft furnishings materials, which are complex. If you talk to British Heart Foundation and Salvation Army, they haven't got enough capacity. Their pipeline is full because they haven't got the storage and they haven't got the outlets. So I think while I don't disagree with you at all about the idea of encouraging people to reuse things, and charitable outlets are good ones, I think bulky soft furnishings are a particular example of a difficult category, which will end up being fly tipped or dumped in a somebody takes a fiver off you and maybe fly tips it around the corner, as the councillor mentioned, because of the difficulty of disposing of it environmentally responsibly or economically.
I think one of the things that we should welcome in the new national strategy is them trying to show the value in waste, and for people to start to value it, not see it as something that's to be thrown at, but actually there's something that's valued. There's an end point to it. Some of the things, the deposit return schemes that they're looking at, which a lot of supermarkets do now, but on a national scale. So instead of someone throwing that bottle away, instead of someone getting rid of that can because it's worthless to them, it actually starts to have a value. I think that's some about the culture change. I think also something that we should welcome in the national is that they're trying to recognise that the UK capacity is not sufficient. They haven't built up the endpoints. How do you get rid of these materials? Where do they go? Will they end up in Indonesia, in other places like that? And how much trust do we have that it's truly getting recycled when it's over there? There's all these questions, is that you can only do the regulatory things, but ultimately you don't travel with the waste over there, do you? So some of that, the way this package is, it should start to stimulate more markets, more value in the waste, which you'll see more industries start to build from it, more job creation. And that's why we're key to look locally as well, because if we can start to bring some of these things locally, it starts to build, coming to our KES, which I think was on earlier, and it starts to work really well together.
Yeah, I think longer term, they will have to work with industry to think about, right from the point where you're making things, you're thinking about the lifetime of that product. So I remember a few years ago, I did some work with a carpet company up in Queensbury, who were developing carpet tiles, and right from the outset they were looking at how those could be reused. So they were put in offices and things, but the plan was that they would go back to Queensbury to be reprocessed so they could be used again to cut down waste and really create a circular economy. And I think those kind of things we will have to look at a national level. Yeah. Could I ask one very specific question? Carl last night mentioned the incineration tax, which is mentioned in the government's green paper. What are the likely implications of that for our waste incineration energy recovery setup that we've got in Huddersfield and the new contract? Is there any threat to it as a result of something like that?
There's no threat to the facility or using the facility. It just starts to be more expensive. So they've put a bit of a 4-year life on this current national strategy. A lot of that is to see how it fares, how does it go, are things working how they want. So they've left the incineration tax in the background but visible. A bit of an incentive in itself. And the way that we think it might work, for example, is on plastics. So we might have to sample our residual waste that goes into the energy from waste plant, and the proportion that is plastic is subject to a separate tax. So it works similar to the landfill tax. So it's a bit of a stick to move us along the chain from residual waste disposal to recycling, reuse and minimisation ultimately. And we also cynically view it that actually there's a huge amount of landfill tax that goes into HMRC, and as that starts to drop naturally through this, I think they'll look at a way of trying to level it off as well. So we think that might come along at some point.
The only thing I just wanted to say was just ensuring that we produce this strategy with our residents, with the key stakeholders, so that co-production thing, which I think you're doing anyway, you know, so I think that's going to be key going forward. And well done on the pilots, on the wormeries and the other stuff, the composting. I think that's really good to see. So,
yeah, so I think with the waste strategy, I think we need to continue the discussion about where scrutiny can come in and perhaps work with you further down the line when you're looking at more specific things, and we may be able to help in terms of formulating the strategy and perhaps reaching out, helping you to reach out to the wider community and ensuring that we're really getting their thoughts coming into the process and making some good decisions. So thanks very much for coming along. It's been really interesting and useful. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, so just to conclude our meeting, looking at the up-and-coming work programme, we've got the visit on the 30th of January. On the 14th of February, we've got the digital strategy coming along. I think it would be quite useful if we can get something by then, possibly, to get at least a brief update on what's happening with Brexit. I don't think we can expect people to put together anything in massive detail about that. But I think it is something that we could do with looking at. I think I raised it within Labour Group, didn't I, in terms of our budget plans, what is happening in terms of looking at Brexit plans. And then the final meeting of this municipal year on the 21st of March, we're due to look at air quality, which is going to be a really big topic. I think we'll have to set aside a lot of time for that. And it's also likely that there may be colleagues from the health and care panel who may join us for that one. And I think we're also due to get back a report on the implementation of the housing strategy, just to update us on how that is going. Right, okay. So thanks very much for sticking with us till a bit of end. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.